There was a time in Korean society when the phrase, "a mountain is a mountain and water is water," was widely talked about by everyone. It's a Buddhist saying. Among the teachings of Venerable Songchul, the phrase, "a mountain is a mountain and water is water," was one that made Korean society reflect deeply for a time. Venerable Songchul passed away in 1993, and he was one of the most respected monks who had a profound influence on modern Buddhism. This is a story from when Venerable Songchul was serving as the Supreme Patriarch of the Jogye order during his lifetime. In our Buddhist tradition, there is a precept not to take life, and officially not eating meat is a formal rule. But in reality, all Buddhists openly eat meat. As we all know well, we eat meat too. Because of this, the monks made a suggestion to Venerable Songchul, who was the Supreme Patriarch at the time. Since everyone is openly eating meat, wouldn't it be better to change this rule? That's what they said. In fact, this dilemma isn't something new in the Buddhist community. It's not just a matter of a day or two or a year or two. Buddhists have been eating meat for a very long time, and even some monks have secretly eaten meat. So within the Buddhist community, this has been a significant source of concern. That's why for a long time, scholars have been searching for a modern reinterpretation of the Buddha's commandment not to kill, wondering if there might be a new way to understand it in today's context. They have been preparing for this. So, since there are results from these preparations, let's use them as a basis to establish the rule that we should not eat meat. Let's not make that a rule anymore. This was the proposal that was put forward to Venerable Songchul. At that time, Venerable Songchul dismissed their proposal with a single word. He simply brushed it aside. What he said was, "If you eat me, the house will collapse." What did Venerable Songchul mean by the house? He was referring to the lives of Buddhists. If Buddhists start eating meat, then the principles and goals by which they should live, the spiritual values that Buddhists hold, would be undermined, wouldn't they? What he meant was that those things would collapse, and the house can also refer to Buddhism itself. He was saying that Buddhism itself could fall apart. So if a Buddhist breaks even one precept, it means they might just follow their own convenience and disregard the rest of the precepts as well. If that happens, the proper way of life for Buddhists will collapse, and ultimately even Buddhism itself could fall apart. That's the idea. To be honest, from our perspective as Christians, we might wonder, is not eating meat really that important? In some ways, not eating meat might even seem foolish. However, from the perspective of Buddhists, it is a crucial belief, an important rule and a key doctrine, so important that if it were ignored, Buddhism itself could collapse. In our country, at Bopjusa Temple on Songnisan Mountain, there's the enormous Maitreya Buddha statue, which stands 33 meters tall, isn't there? From our point of view, that statue was originally made entirely of gold back in the year 776 during the Silla dynasty, but now it is made of bronze. It was originally made of gold, so why would they go to such lengths, using so much gold, to create a Buddha statue as tall as 33 meters? We might think that way, but for them, it was an expression of their own faith. They did it out of religious devotion. During the reign of King Gojong of the Joseon dynasty, a lot of money was needed to rebuild Gyeongbokgung Palace. At that time, the regent for King Gojong was Hungson Daewongun, his father. Since there wasn't enough money to rebuild Gyeongbokgung, Hungson Daewongun decided to dismantle the gold from the Buddha statue at Bopjusa Temple and use it to raise funds for the reconstruction. From the perspective of the Joseon royal family, who revered Confucianism, it was seen as unnecessary. The country needed to survive, so taking the gold to raise funds was, in a way, a natural decision for the royal family. But from the perspective of Buddhists, what does that mean? It is a matter of extreme violence, systemic coercion and brutal oppression. The vast majority of historical religious wars have a strong tendency to manifest themselves in that specific form and in that exact manner. In fact, unless it's a cult or a completely heretical religion, all the religions in the world actually possess virtues that are beneficial to human life. A religion that is entirely disadvantageous or completely useless could never last long in this world. So, if you look into the principles and doctrines of all religions, you'll find that they contain teachings that are highly beneficial to human life. But then we say to each other that way, our religion is the real one, we are the truth. We are the truth. We argue with each other like that, but in reality, there's no need for religions to fight, insisting we're the real one, we have the true truth. You just need to watch quietly. What should you watch for? If a religion is founded on truth, it won't manifest itself violently. So every religion puts forward a good cause, don't they? They put forward good causes, but what are those basic causes? Life, respect, human dignity, these are all fundamental virtues that they uphold. They may claim to have such virtues in name, but if in the end they do not respect life or humanity and resort to violence, then no matter how noble their cause or how much truth they claim to have, it becomes clear that the religion is not built on true principles. As we saw up until last week, Paul's evangelism in Ephesus had an enormous impact. When Paul baptized people in Ephesus in the name of Jesus, many received baptism. The Holy Spirit came upon them, and they even began to speak in tongues and prophesy. Astonishing miracles began to happen. Even when Paul's handkerchief was placed on the sick, they were healed, and even those possessed by evil spirits were set free. Paul described the atmosphere of this period in a letter to the Corinthian church, depicting it in this way in 1 Corinthians 16. The reason I intend to stay in Ephesus until Pentecost is that a great and effective door has been opened to me. Such was the power with which the gospel was proclaimed, that a wide and effective door was opened. This is how he describes it. But just as a strong light casts a deep shadow, the more vigorously the gospel was being spread, the more opponents there were trying to hinder it. So, although a great and effective door was opened, what does it say next? It says that there were many people who strongly opposed him. That is exactly how it is described. Ephesus was a major city that worshipped various idols, specifically the goddess Artemis. It was known to be a very deeply religious and traditional city. Among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, like the pyramids and so on, one of them is actually the Temple of Artemis, which was built in Ephesus. Even today, it is still counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Temple of Artemis was 137 meters long and 69 meters wide. So it was built on a plot of land even larger than a modern football stadium. There were 127 columns, each standing 18 meters tall. How could people in ancient times have constructed such a building? It truly is a wonder. Even today, many people still think so. The fact that they built such an awe-inspiring temple shows us the true devotion the people of Ephesus had for the goddess Artemis. They worshipped Artemis with genuine sincerity. But then Paul came and began to preach the gospel, and the message of that gospel was this. In verse 26, it says that Paul preached the gospel not only in Ephesus, but almost throughout all of Asia. But in fact, the content of his preaching was always the same. What was it? At things made by human hands and not God's. Why did he say this? It wasn't to disregard them, but rather he had no choice but to say this in order to testify to and explain the existence of God. But the problem was that Artemis was an idol, so naturally there were people who made idols. These craftsmen made idols and sold them not only in Ephesus, but throughout all of Asia, gaining immense wealth and fame. But as they listened closely to what Paul was saying, they began to feel that their economic privileges were being threatened. They started to feel that this was dangerous. It's not that the idols had stopped selling yet, but in their minds they thought, this isn't good. If this goes on, our business will be ruined. And so they developed a sense of crisis. So they began to appeal to the religious devotion of the people of Ephesus. Now, verse 27. Not only is there a danger that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited. They say, this Artemis whom we worship, and her temple, aren't they our pride? Aren't they magnificent? But because of this gospel, we're now being disregarded. They go on, the majesty of Artemis, whom all Asia and the whole world worship, might be brought down. By shouting such provocative slogans, they are stirring up opposition to the gospel and trying to undermine its influence. Because of the agitation stirred up by the craftsmen who made and sold idols, many people in Ephesus began to take action. They agreed, saying, that's right, and started looking for Paul, determined to capture and kill him. But they couldn't find Paul, so instead they found two of his co-workers, Gaius and Aristarchus. They seized the two men and dragged them into the theatre. Why did they do this? They did this to hold a people's trial, to kill them, to incite the crowd to murder. At that time, the theatre in Ephesus could seat 25,000 people at once. To put that in perspective, that's about the size of Jamsil Baseball Stadium. An enormous crowd had gathered. Back then, a truly massive number of people had come together, all intent on killing Paul and his companions. The atmosphere was so hostile, violent, and threatening that you could genuinely feel the danger of being killed. Paul couldn't just stand by and do nothing, because Gaius and Aristarchus were about to be killed. So as he tried to rush into the theatre, in verse 30 it says that Paul wanted to go in among the crowd in the theatre, but the disciples stopped him, saying, if you go in, you'll be killed. They tried to dissuade him, but the verb to stop here in Greek ion is in the imperfect tense. What does the imperfect tense mean? It refers to an action that's repeated or ongoing. So Paul had to save them. They're going to die. If they just stayed put, both of them would die. So he kept trying to go in, and each time the disciples would stop him, saying, if you go in, you'll die too. And so they kept going back and forth like that. When we see Paul rushing in to save his companions and the disciples trying to stop him, we can fully imagine just how incredibly tense the atmosphere was, how real the threat of murder must have felt to everyone there, and how extremely dangerous the situation was. You can clearly tell just how out of control things had become if you take a moment to look at the details in verse 32. People were shouting, some saying one thing and others saying another, so the crowd was in confusion, and most of them didn't even know why they had gathered. They're shouting, let's kill him, but why did he have to die? There was no one to explain what was going on. Some people gave one reason, others gave another, so it just turned into a gathering swept up in irrational frenzy. They didn't even know why they had come together. Yet they were filled with a murderous intent to kill someone. It was violent. Was it because they worshipped the idol of Artemis that they ended up having such a frenzied assembly? Not necessarily. No matter how noble the cause or how much you proclaim the truth. If you believe without thinking, as we see here, there's no one who can actually say the reason. They're left wondering, why did we even gather? You know, when we watch sports matches, the commentator often says things like that. When you watch a baseball game, the commentator will say things like, that was a bunt play, or something similar. If you act without thinking, with your brain switched off, you won't get a good play. That's what they're saying. It's the same with faith. No matter how noble your religious cause, or how much you claim it's the truth, if your head is empty, you can easily become a fanatic. Let me share 3 stories with you. First, in December 1994, on the 30th, there was a 22-year-old man named John Salvi, who was a Catholic. As we all know, Catholicism is a faith that values the sanctity of life and upholds doctrines that emphasize the importance of respecting life. So, opposing abortion was one of the rules of Catholicism. As a Catholic, John Salvi naturally placed great importance on this doctrine. He believed that abortion should never happen. That was his conviction. In fact, as we all know, America is a country where whenever there's a major event or issue, people are usually divided into pro- and anti-abortion camps, aren't they? This young man, Salvi, believed that his religious conviction that abortion should never happen was absolutely justified. Of course it was justified, not just for him personally, but as a general principle that should naturally be respected. However, after seeing that American society did not accept this, he agonized over it, and in the end, he picked up a gun. He targeted those he suspected of performing abortions. Thank you. He went into the hospital and opened fire with a gun. As a result, one person died on the spot, and several others were seriously or moderately injured. But the incident didn't end there. After leaving the hospital, he went to another location 2 miles away and fired shots again. At the time, witnesses at the scene said that Salvi, while shooting, said things like, "You are being punished for the sins you have committed. You deserve to be punished." That's what he reportedly said as he opened fire. Salvi was arrested and imprisoned, but what's even more ironic is that while serving his sentence, he suffocated himself by wrapping his head in a black plastic bag. He committed suicide. Isn't that strange, everyone? Why did the Catholic Church establish the doctrine that abortion must not be done? It's because of the value placed on respecting life, isn't it? You should respect your own life too. Isn't it wrong to commit suicide? Not only that, but even if someone has different thoughts, beliefs, or doctrines from mine, if you shoot or kill them just because their beliefs are different, you're destroying the value of respecting life, aren't you? Why would someone do such a thing? Let me tell you one more thing. In June of last year, 2025, a 57-year-old man named Vance Luther Bolter, who is widely reported to have worked extensively as a dedicated missionary throughout the Middle East and Africa, and also preached to many people as a Protestant pastor, returned to the United States and forcibly broke into the private home of a female Democratic congresswoman in Minnesota. He tragically shot and killed the congresswoman and her husband. Furthermore, he also tried to harm another Democratic couple who publicly supported abortion rights, severely injuring them, and although he initially fled the scene, he was eventually caught and arrested thanks to a very large-scale, coordinated police operation. He was apprehended. As you know, Protestants take the Bible as the principle for their lives. What does the Bible say? The Bible says, "Do not kill." Isn't that one of the 10 Commandments? But to kill someone just because they have different beliefs from you, how could someone who was supposed to live by the principles of the Bible commit such an act? It's only natural for us to think that way. It's just incomprehensible, truly incomprehensible. Did this happen because American society makes it so easy to access guns? Now, another unfortunate incident that happened in our country last year took place in January 2025 in front of the high-ranking official's crime investigation office in Guachon, what we commonly call the Corruption Investigation Office. A 59-year-old man set himself on fire. It was self-immolation. He suffered third-degree burns all over his body, so he was rushed to the hospital, but sadly he passed away a few days later. But this was not the first time he had attempted self-immolation. He had tried it before. When reporters asked why he attempted it, he cited political reasons. It seems he wanted to make a statement to a society where his political beliefs were not accepted, using self-immolation to draw attention. But when I looked into who this man was, I found out he was a pastor who had founded a church in a certain region, a founding pastor of a small church. What's even more admirable is that while running this small church, he didn't just focus on his own ministry, he also took great care of the homeless people in the area. He was involved in ministry for the homeless. Why do people start churches? Why do we build churches? Why do we care for the homeless? Isn't it because every single life is precious and worth caring for? Isn't it to save a soul, to build a church out of a heart that loves souls? That's why he helped the homeless and built up the church, isn't it? At the heart of his desire to help the most vulnerable in society, what was there? It was because he cherished the value of life and held the precious worth of human dignity in his heart. But suicide is to end one's own life. Now, in my generation, when we were young, among the many types of books we read, this kind of book was also widely read, the biography of John Tayil. If you read it, there are quite a few heartbreaking passages, because it captures the pain of that era, when we realized, there was such pain in our time, it made us empathize with that suffering. That's why the young John Tayil of that time was even called an activist martyr. Amidst the pain of the times, that young John Tayil set himself on fire. Some of the people who read those books with me back then even said things like this: if Jesus were to come among us in this day and age, he would have come in the form of a young man like John Tayil. I even heard people say things like that. That's how powerfully and sublimely that scene of self-immolation was depicted at the time. However, a few years later, the author of that book, lawyer Cho Young-rae, said this. He regretted that in describing John Tayil's self-immolation, he had used language that was too rhetorical, too strong and intense. He said he regretted it. His original intention in depicting the self-immolation so forcefully was to expose an era that disregarded human dignity and treated people as mere tools, and to denounce the violence of society. That's why he described the self-immolation so strongly, but he later deeply regretted having done so. Why do you think that was? Reflecting on that era, one must wonder how it was even possible for Korean society in our time to expect individuals to labor under such incredibly poor and hazardous working conditions without any protection. It's truly difficult to comprehend how such a systemic disregard for safety was permitted. This situation represents a profound and unacceptable violation of basic human dignity and the fundamental rights that every single person deserves to have respected. It was to expose that. Girls aged 12, 13 and 15 coming up to Seoul from the countryside, barely able to eat or sleep properly, living harshly in those workplaces for over 15 hours a day under oppressive and coercive conditions. Is a society where human dignity is destroyed truly a normal society? Let us comfort their pain. The Chrysley voice. Please, let us live like human beings. Please let us live like human beings too. I wrote the book from the perspective of respecting life to highlight that. After reading that book, they said that reading it made their thoughts about death grew stronger and that they truly regretted it and felt they had done something wrong. When we become fixated on a single idea or immerse ourselves in one thing, we inevitably become biased. In doing so, we often lose sight of the fundamental values we once held dear, more often than we realize. That is the part where the author, lawyer Young-rae, deeply reflected. When he wrote the biography of John Tayil, his motivation was to talk about human values, to speak about the value of life. But if, after reading it, people end up glorifying death or come to think lightly of life, then that is wrong. Therefore, our religious beliefs, the doctrines we learn, internalizing these is what faith is, isn't it? Faith is learning doctrine, embracing the truth, and practicing to live it out in our daily lives, isn't it? But when we try to put this into practice, when we internalize it, we must be very careful not to become biased. If we become biased, we lose sight of the essence. Without even realizing it, we end up missing what's truly important. What is a typical example of such biased thinking that makes us lose the essence? It's black and white thinking. It's dividing everything into good and evil. It's the belief that there's no room for compromise between good and evil, so it's always just one or the other, black or white. Now, think about it for a moment. Is everyone who isn't on our side an enemy? No. No, that's not the case. Before Jesus entered the Samaritan village, he sent his disciples ahead to prepare the people there to welcome him. The disciples went and told the Samaritans that Jesus was coming and asked them to get ready to receive him. But the Samaritans had no intention of welcoming him. Instead, they looked down on him and ignored him. The disciples came to Jesus and told him about the situation with the Samaritans, saying this in Luke chapter 9, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them?" They don't welcome us at all. Those Samaritans aren't even real people. They're all just dogs. Isn't it right to call down fire and wipe them out? That's the kind of suggestion they made. But instead, Jesus rebuked the disciples and quietly went on to another village. Is everyone who isn't on my side an enemy? No, the disciples came to Jesus and said something like this. One day they said, "Jesus, there are people who don't follow us, people who aren't on our side, and they're over there casting out demons in your name. They're taking our things and going off to do business somewhere else. Shouldn't we stop them?" That's what they said. What did the Lord say in response? Leave them be, just let them be. Jesus didn't divide people into black and white, into your side and my side. Why is that? Why do you think that was? Why did Jesus tell them to just leave it alone? Jesus knew the essence. What is the true purpose for which Jesus came to this earth? He came to save lives. He never forgot that essence. If you get caught up in black and white thinking and judge the world with a dichotomy of good and evil, things seem clear and unambiguous. There's no confusion. This is it. You can hold on to what's certain. And without having to worry too much, we can live out our faith more comfortably and with certainty. But you might lose sight of the essence. You can lose it. Even when we look at ourselves, whether it's seeing our reflection in the mirror or reflecting on our lives, wherever we look, take a moment to look inside yourself. Is there only good within us? No. Good and evil coexist within us. If you divide good and evil, you can't eat with tax collectors and sinners. You can't eat together with them. But Jesus ate together with sinners and tax collectors. Jesus didn't say, keep the tax collectors and sinners from coming over here. He didn't say, I won't bow to them. He didn't divide people into sides like that. We need to carefully consider how we hold on to our faith, convictions, beliefs, and what we call truth, those kinds of principles and justifications. There are about 2 things we can do, I think, to avoid being biased, and we should make an effort in these 2 areas. The first is what we call the echo chamber phenomenon. You know, when we go into a very tightly closed, narrow space and make a sound, that sound echoes back and sounds much louder. That's what we call the echo chamber effect, isn't it? So, if we're not open and are completely closed off, only my own thoughts and my own voice sound loud to me. Only my own beliefs are amplified, and I can't hear any other voices. You all go travelling, don't you? And you go on business trips as well, but sometimes those trips fall on a Sunday, don't they? Sometimes it might even be a Wednesday. What do you do in those situations? We attend our Sharing and Serving Churches online service. It's something to be grateful for, truly. But if you've gone that far, you should look for a local church in that area. That's the right thing to do. If you've searched and still can't find one, then attending an online service is the right choice. Someone told me they went to London, so I asked, since you were in London, did you try attending a service at Westminster Church on Sunday? They said they attended the service online. Of course, that's something to be grateful for, but where else would we get such an opportunity? It's right to live out our faith with an open heart like that. Only then can we discern between truth and falsehood. Even on social networks, all sorts of rumours spread, don't they? And then many people send those things to me as well. They send a lot of these things to people around me as well, saying things like, this is what happened at such and such church, or this is what a certain pastor did, or there's talk about this politically, and so on. People just keep talking about it. For example, a content creator on the YouTube platform recently claimed that a certain well-known person had passed away. I was really shocked and immediately and urgently searched the news that day, but it wasn't reported anywhere at all. It was completely fabricated, a total lie. When we hear something surprising, we truly need to check if it's actually true. Try using the advanced AI tools you often use, like Gemini, Perplexity, or ChatGPT. If you ask them for help, they'll tell you which things are fake and which are real. They're certainly clever enough to figure all of that out for you. There are real things and fake things mixed together. If something is 50% true and 50% false, what does that make it? Imagine here, 50% is water and 50% is poison, but they are mixed together. What is it then? It's poison, isn't it? That's a very sophisticated trick used by those who try to manipulate others. How could someone who wants to stir things up only tell lies? People who incite others always include some truth in what they say, but there are lies mixed in as well. That's how they manage to stir people up, making you angry, making you hate or despise someone, or pushing you to act rashly. Instead of getting worked up and thinking, oh, what a terrible thing, I'm saying you should take a moment to look at things calmly. It's the same even within the church, isn't it? When you hear that someone did something, don't just think, of course, the church really does have a lot of problems, and get angry. Instead of getting angry, just try making a single phone call. Just give them a call once. And say, oh, is that what happened? Why get angry over it? Why get so worked up? Anger isn't our true nature, is it? Love is our true nature, isn't it? Make an effort to hold on to that essence. Secondly, as I've mentioned before, it's all about algorithms. We say we get a lot of information from watching YouTube, but we don't even realize we're only seeing what we always watch. We don't even realize that we're only hearing what we want to hear. You know, whenever I'm out driving in my car and listening to some music, you know how a specific playlist just suddenly pops up on the screen? And it seems like the playlists that always come up are exclusively CCM playlists, aren't they? So I have to ask, do you honestly think that I only ever want to listen to CCM music every single time while I'm driving around? I'm being honest here, even for myself. There are times when I don't want to listen to just CCM. Sometimes I want to listen to pop songs, sometimes I want to listen to classical music, but only those playlists show up. It's hard to change it while I'm driving. So what should I do? That's why on purpose I search for other music in amps. I deliberately search for it. That's how Salmon comes up. And A Million Roses comes up too. You might ask, Pastor, why does A Million Roses come up? Everyone try listening to it. The lyrics contain perfect Christian truth. You might just remember Sim Su Bong's trot melody, but look at the lyrics. It's perfect Christian truth. You need to look for those kinds of things in advance so you can easily access and listen to them whenever you want. That way you won't get caught up in the algorithm. It's the same with our church's training programs. There are training programs with different theological perspectives. For example, Oh Song-kyung and PSP each have slightly different theological viewpoints. But because the theological perspectives are different, we've designed the education so that you won't get stuck in an algorithm. So if you listen to Oh Sang-yong but refuse to listen to PSP, or you listen to PSP but refuse to listen to Oh Sang-yong, that's not the right approach. Among the conclusions of today's passage, there is an exceptionally precious verse. Verse 31. Also, some of the officials of Asia, who were friends of Paul, who does it say were Paul's friends? Some of the officials of Asia who were friends of Paul sent word to him, warning him not to go into the theatre, because there were about 25,000 people there, and the threat to his life was too great. So his friends advised him not to enter the theatre. But who were these friends? They were officials of Asia. The word Asiarchos is Greek, and it means the high priest of Asia. In every important city and administrative region, they built temples for emperor worship. So the person who managed the temple was the high priest in charge of the emperor's temple. That person was the Asiarches. Since Ephesus belonged to the region of Asia, the high priest who was responsible for the emperor's temple throughout all of Asia, who offered sacrifices and presided over the rituals to the emperor's deity, what was he called? They say he was a friend. A friend! Does that even make sense? Kyrios. Calling Jesus Kyrios. At that time, the emperor was called Kyrios. So to call Jesus Kyrios was an act of rebellion. It was rebellion against the emperor. It was unthinkable. There were things like this that made it impossible for Christianity to coexist with the prevailing order. Everyone, do you think Paul was compromising? Was Paul a liberal theologian? Paul consistently maintained a profound focus on the fundamental essence of salvation and life. Even if you tried to communicate with those kinds of priests, you could already guess what they'd say. They'd just tell you to worship the emperor. It's not that he cut off communication. In fact, he was communicating with those high priests on a regular basis. Describing them as friends means that there was communication between them. We all know how difficult it is to hold on to religious convictions and have firm faith. When we try to stick to our beliefs while living in the world, we hear so many different voices. How many tempting voices do we hear? So, of course, it's only natural that it's so difficult to keep our convictions and our faith. But does that mean we should block out everything else and live like that? Everyone, do not be afraid. Fear can eat away at our faith. Those words from that heretical sect could devour our Christianity. Their shouts could shake all of our truth. Never be afraid. The Christianity we know, the truth we hold, is not that easily shaken. Look at our history. Countless philosophers, countless ideologies, countless religions, and even the powers of the world have tried to destroy the truth of Christianity. But our truth has never been broken. Why is that? Why has it not been broken? Because the Lord rules over this earth, and that is what we confess. Our ruler is Jesus Christ, and because he has reigned from eternity past, is reigning now, and will reign forevermore, my life is in his hands, and so I have nothing to fear. That is why Paul, with such boldness, was able to communicate even in front of those who worshipped the Roman emperor. What does it mean to communicate? His beliefs and convictions were conveyed. Don't be afraid. In the name of the Lord, I pray that you will live a life of faith, believing that the Lord rules over this earth and not losing sight of the essence of our love for truth. Amen.